Imagine falling in love with someone who makes you feel like the most special person in the world, only to discover later that it was all a mask. That was my life with Damian. Charming in public, cruel behind closed doors. For years, I thought I was the problem, until I finally realized I was living with a narcissist. This is my story of survival, escape, and healing. It often starts like a fairy tale. I still remember the night I met Damian. He walked into the room with a smile that made everyone turn their heads. He wasn't just charming, he was magnetic. When he spoke to me, it was like the world stopped. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not just noticed, but truly chosen. He listened to me in a way no one ever had before. When I talked about my dreams, he leaned in close, repeating my words back to me as if they were his own. If I said I loved traveling, he suddenly loved traveling too. If I shared my dream of starting a small business, he encouraged me, telling me he had the same vision for his future. It felt like destiny, like we were two halves of the same soul. In those early months, he showered me with affection. Flowers, handwritten notes, endless phone calls that stretched past midnight. He told me I was beautiful, that he had never met anyone like me. My friends warned me it was too good to be true, but I laughed it off. Who wouldn't want a man so in tune with their heart? Looking back, I realize now what he was doing mirroring me. Narcissists are experts at it. They study you, absorb your values, your likes, your weaknesses, and reflect them back so perfectly that you believe you've found your soulmate. At the time, though, I couldn't see it. All I knew was that I felt chosen in a way I had never felt before. It was intoxicating. It felt like the love story I had always dreamed of. And that's how it always begins, with a dream so sweet, you never imagine it could turn into a nightmare. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Damian still bought me flowers, still kissed my forehead in front of friends, still played the role of the perfect husband when others were watching. But little cracks began to show when it was just the two of us. The first time, it seemed harmless. I came out of the bedroom wearing a dress I loved, something that made me feel beautiful. Damian looked at me for a moment, then smiled in that half-amused way of his, and said, "Are you really going to wear that?" I laughed it off, but inside, I felt small. Suddenly, I wasn't sure if the dress looked good anymore. It didn't stop there. If I told a story at dinner, he would interrupt and finish it for me, adding little corrections that made me feel foolish. If I got excited about an idea, he'd smirk and say, "That's cute, but you don't really know how the world works." Each comment was small enough to dismiss on its own, but together they began to eat away at me. The man who once told me I was brilliant, unique, and beautiful now seemed to take pleasure in making me doubt myself. And the worst part? He would always follow it up with some act of affection, an arm around my shoulder, a quick kiss, a soft, "You know I love you." It was confusing, like being pulled close and pushed away at the same time. I started to believe maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I really was overreacting. After all, everyone else still saw Damian as the perfect husband. How could I explain what was happening when even I couldn't make sense of it? Looking back, I see the truth. This was the beginning of the slow erosion of my confidence. The subtle shifts, the tiny cuts, designed to weaken me so he could control me, and I was falling right into it. Life with Damian quickly became unpredictable. One moment, he was affectionate and playful, pulling me close and making me laugh. The next, his mood would turn without warning, and I would find myself staring at a stranger. I never knew which version of him would walk through the door. I started learning the art of silence. If I sensed tension in his jaw, I kept my words short. If he sighed a certain way, I stopped whatever I was doing. I learned to study the way he dropped his keys on the counter, the way he loosened his tie, even the way his footsteps sounded in the hallway. Each detail gave me a clue about whether it was going to be a good night or a storm. Damian never yelled in public. He saved that for me, behind closed doors, where no one could see. And when he didn't yell, he punished me with silence. Sometimes he wouldn't speak to me for days, walking past me as if I didn't exist. I would beg him to tell me what I had done wrong, but he would only shake his head and mutter, "You should know." I lived in a constant state of anxiety, tiptoeing around every word and action. I stopped sharing my feelings because I was afraid they would be used against me. I stopped asking for help because I knew he would twist it into weakness. It was like being trapped in a game where the rules kept changing, and no matter how carefully I played, I always lost. I didn't realize it then, but this was the point where I stopped being myself. I became a shadow of the person I once was, shrinking smaller each day, just trying to survive the storm that was my husband. At first, it was subtle. Damian would raise an eyebrow when I mentioned spending time with a friend, or he'd say, "Do you really think she cares about you the way I do?" It sounded protective, even loving. I thought maybe he just wanted more of my time. And isn't that what love is? Wanting to be together? But slowly, the circle around me began to shrink. Lunch dates with friends became arguments. Phone calls with family turned into silent treatments. If I wanted to visit someone, he would suddenly remember something important I had to do for him. If I went anyway, he would sulk for days, punishing me with cold stares and sharp words. I began to dread the effort of explaining myself. Eventually, it was easier to stay home, easier to cancel plans than deal with his moods, easier to tell people I was busy than to confess I was trapped. Damian also took over our finances. At first, it was practical. He was better with numbers, he said, and he wanted to take care of me. But soon, I found myself asking permission for every little expense. Even buying a coffee felt like something I had to justify. My independence slowly slipped through my fingers until I could barely remember what it felt like to make a decision on my own. The more isolated I became, the more I depended on him, not just financially, but emotionally. He was the only constant voice in my ear, shaping how I saw myself, convincing me that others didn't really care. Looking back, I can see how carefully it was done. Isolation wasn't sudden, it was built brick by brick, until I was standing in a prison I hadn't realized he was constructing around me. And the scariest part? I was starting to believe I belonged there. There's only so much a person can carry before something inside begins to snap. For me, the breaking point didn't come in one big dramatic explosion, it came in quiet moments that piled up until they buried me. I remember one night, sitting on the edge of our bed, holding back tears as Damian scrolled on his phone beside me. I had spent the entire day trying to do everything right. Dinner ready, the house spotless, myself dressed the way he liked. Still, he had barely looked at me. When I asked softly, "Did I do something wrong?" he sighed and said, "You're exhausting. Why can't you just relax and stop being so needy?" Those words shattered something in me. I realized then that no matter how hard I tried, it would never be enough. His love wasn't something I could earn or hold on to, it was something he dangled in front of me, giving and taking as he pleased. Around the same time, I started secretly reading articles about narcissistic abuse. The words on the screen described my life with eerie accuracy, gaslighting, silent treatments, the cycle of love and cruelty. For the first time, I saw the pattern laid bare. It wasn't that I was broken. It was that he was breaking me. The moment of clarity was terrifying, because once you recognize the truth, you can't unsee it. I could no longer tell myself he would change, or that this was just a rough patch. Deep down, I knew the marriage wasn't love, it was control. That realization was the beginning of a long, painful journey. But in that moment, all I felt was fear. Fear of leaving, fear of staying, fear of admitting to myself that the life I had built was a cage. And for the first time, I started asking the question I had been too afraid to face. What if I don't survive this? Leaving Damian, at least in my mind, wasn't a single decision, but a slow awakening. I started small. I began journaling when he wasn't around, writing down what he said and how it made me feel. Seeing the words on paper made the abuse real in a way my heart had been too scared to admit. I also carved out little moments just for me. Taking a walk, listening to music with headphones on, reading self-help blogs late at night when Damian was asleep. Each tiny act was a reminder that I still existed beneath the silence and fear. There was a shift inside me when I realized I wasn't crazy. For years, Damian had convinced me I was the problem, that I was too sensitive, too needy, too emotional. But slowly, I started believing that maybe the problem wasn't me, it was him. It was terrifying, because it meant admitting my marriage was a lie. But it was also liberating, because for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. Narcissists are experts at keeping their image polished in public. Damian was no different. To friends and colleagues, he was the perfect husband, charming, successful, attentive. People would tell me how lucky I was, and I'd smile while dying inside. But little by little, his mask slipped. He grew careless. He snapped at me in front of a neighbor once, his voice sharp with irritation. He made a cruel joke at my expense at a dinner party, leaving me humiliated while others awkwardly laughed. For the first time, people began to see cracks in the image he had built, and for the first time, I didn't rush to cover for him. I let the silence hang. I let people wonder. It was a small act of rebellion, but it gave me strength. Damian's favorite weapon was gaslighting. If I confronted him about something he said, he'd smirk and say, "That never happened, you're imagining things." If I cried, he'd whisper, "See, you're unstable. No one would put up with you but me." He twisted reality until I doubted my own mind. Sometimes I would sit in the dark, repeating conversations over and over, trying to decide if they were real or if I had truly made them up. But the more I read about narcissistic abuse, the more I recognized the tactics. I began to catch myself in those spirals, whispering to myself, "You're not crazy. This is real." That small anchor of truth helped me survive. There is nothing colder than being invisible in your own home. Damian perfected the silent treatment, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. He would walk past me like I was air, eat dinner without a word, sleep with his back turned to me. I begged him to talk to me, to tell me what I had done wrong. He always responded with the same cruel phrase, "If you don't know, then I can't help you." It drove me to desperation. I felt like I was starving for connection, yet being punished for wanting it. And the worst part, when he finally forgave me and started talking again, I felt relief instead of anger. That's how deep the conditioning ran. I saw his crumbs of attention as love. One morning, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. My eyes were dull, my skin pale, my smile gone. I looked like a ghost of the woman I used to be. In that moment, something shifted. I realized if I stayed with Damian, I would disappear completely. He wasn't just taking my happiness, he was taking me. That was when the idea of leaving stopped being a dream and started becoming a plan. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew I couldn't keep living this way. And once the thought was born, it never left me. Once I admitted to myself that I needed to leave, everything changed. I started moving quietly, like a shadow in my own life. I hid small amounts of money whenever I could, coins in a jar at the back of the closet, bills tucked into books Damian never touched. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I also began saving important documents, my ID, bank papers, anything I would need if I left. I stored them in an old envelope at the bottom of a drawer, careful never to leave a trace. Every step felt dangerous. Damian noticed everything, and if he caught me, I didn't know how he would react. But the thought of staying forever scared me more than the risk of leaving. The final push didn't come from a huge fight. It was a small, ordinary moment that cut deeper than any yelling could. I had cooked Damian's favorite meal. I set the table, lit candles, tried to create a warm evening. He walked in, glanced at the food, and said, "You couldn't even get the sauce, right? Useless." Then he sat down, scrolling his phone, ignoring me completely. Something inside me snapped. I stood there, frozen, realizing that no matter how much I gave, no matter how hard I tried, it would never be enough. That word useless echoed in my head until it turned into fuel. That night, I decided I was done. I didn't tell Damian. I knew if I did, he would twist it, beg me to stay, or threaten me. So I moved quietly. One morning, when he left for work, I packed a small bag, grabbed my envelope of papers, and walked out the door. My hands shook the whole time, my heart pounding so loud I thought neighbors could hear it. I didn't know where I was going, only that anywhere was better than here. As I stepped outside, the air felt different, cold but freeing. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Damian didn't let go easily. He flooded me with calls and messages. First, he begged, "I'll change. Please come back." Then, he blamed, "This is all your fault. You're nothing without me." But I didn't answer. Each ignored call was an act of strength. Each block on social media was a wall I rebuilt for myself. Friends I had lost touch with slowly came back into my life. They didn't ask for explanations. They just showed up, offering coffee, conversation, and quiet understanding. It was strange, learning how to exist without fear. Strange, but beautiful. Healing wasn't instant. Some days, I felt free. Other days, I felt broken, as if Damian's voice still lived in my head, whispering that I was worthless. But I kept going. I started therapy, speaking my story out loud to someone who didn't judge me. Each session peeled away another layer of lies I had believed for so long. I also rediscovered old hobbies: painting, writing, walking in the park. Each small joy was a brick in the foundation of my new life. Slowly, I began to see myself not as a victim, but as a survivor. I realized that leaving Damian wasn't just about escaping him. It was about finding me again. Even after I left, Damian didn't disappear completely. His voice stayed with me, like a ghost haunting my thoughts. When I made a mistake at work, I would hear him whisper, "You're useless." When I looked in the mirror, I half expected to see the broken woman he convinced me I was. Some nights, I even missed him, not the real Damian, but the version he pretended to be in the beginning. The man who told me I was his soulmate. The one who held my hand and made me feel safe. That was the cruelest part of all. I wasn't just grieving the abuse, I was grieving the illusion. But each time those feelings came, I reminded myself of the truth. That man never really existed. He was a mask Damian wore to trap me. And once I saw that clearly, the ghost began to fade. With time, I grew stronger. I began speaking about what I had been through, not to everyone, but to those who needed to hear it. A friend going through her own toxic relationship. A woman I met in a support group who felt too ashamed to share her story. Every time I told my truth, I felt lighter. I realized that silence had been Damian's greatest weapon. He thrived on secrecy, on making me feel alone. By speaking out, I was breaking the cycle. I also started setting boundaries in all areas of my life. I learned the power of saying no, the power of walking away when someone tried to manipulate me. For the first time in years, my voice belonged to me. Looking back, it feels like another lifetime. The woman who walked on eggshells, who begged for scraps of affection, who believed she was broken, that woman isn't me anymore. She was trapped, but she found her way out. Damian will always be a part of my story, but he no longer defines it. What defines me is survival, strength, the decision to choose myself, even when it was terrifying. If there's one lesson I carry, it's this. You cannot love someone into changing, especially someone who feeds on control. You can't fix a narcissist, but you can save yourself. Walking away wasn't weakness. It was the bravest thing I've ever done. And now, when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who isn't just surviving, she's living.
Wow, what a journey. From the fairy tale beginning, to the gaslighting, isolation, and finally, the courage to walk away. Her story reminds us that surviving a narcissist isn't about fixing them. It's about saving yourself. But let me ask you, if you were in her shoes, would you have stayed and tried to make it work, or left sooner to reclaim your freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget, subscribe for more true stories of heartbreak, betrayal, and survival. Until next time, remember, lies can trap you in silence, but regrets will always remind you why you deserve better.